Welcome back. This lecture is one of the lectures regarding the biosphere. In this lecture, we are going to talk about photosynthesis, respiration, net primary production, and what that means for ecosystems. So let's get started. First up, let's define oxygenic photosynthesis. You may be used to thinking of this as just photosynthesis, but it is technically oxygenic photosynthesis. Oxygenic photosynthesis takes CO2, water, and solar radiation and makes sugar and oxygen, hence oxygenic photosynthesis. In order to complete any form of photosynthesis, chlorophyll and sunlight are required. With oxygenic photosynthesis, chlorophyll utilizes solar energy to split water, and oxygen is a byproduct. It takes the electrons or energy that were stored in the bonds of water and makes ATP and NADPH, which are energy storage molecules within cells. Then this chemical energy is used to make organic matter from CO2. This process is shown well in the bottom image on the right. Oxygenic photosynthesis is performed by green plants, which are photosynthetic eukaryotes, algae, which are aquatic photosynthetic eukaryotes, and cyanobacteria, which are aquatic photosynthetic prokaryotes. The end result is carbon fixation. That is, atmospheric carbon, or CO2, is fixed into organic compounds, like sugar, which are rich in energy that is stored in the chemical bonds. Remember that life on Earth is carbon-based, and the carbon in most of life's molecules ultimately comes from photosynthesis, which comes from CO2 in the air. CO2 is also a greenhouse gas, and so photosynthesis removes it from the atmosphere. With any type of photosynthesis, solar energy is converted to chemical bond energy for storage purposes, and it supports entire food webs. To say that again, photosynthesis is a process that stores solar energy in chemical form. It powers virtually all life on modern Earth, so it's a key process for Earth's habitability. Oxygenic photosynthesis also produces oxygen, which is needed by all aerobic organisms for respiration. We're an example of an aerobic organism. Now let's talk about respiration. Respiration is the opposite process of photosynthesis. Sugars, carbohydrates, or complex organic matter of some kind combines with oxygen to make carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Energy is produced in the process. The amount of energy produced depends on the organic molecule that was being respired. Organisms use this energy to maintain themselves and grow and reproduce. Humans and animals depend on plants to make our food either directly, if plants are eaten, or indirectly, if meat is eaten. Respiration is similar to combustion and decombustion in terms of biogeochemical cycles. Complex organic molecules are broken down into CO2 and water. Think of a campfire. Here's a good image that shows the basic process of photosynthesis and respiration. You can see that they are exact opposites of one another. The rates of photosynthesis and respiration are approximately equal globally over the course of a year, but they are extremely variable across seasons and ecosystem types. We know the reactants necessary for photosynthesis, CO2, water, and sunlight, so let's talk about habitats that can support oxygenic photosynthesis. There is plenty of CO2 in any environment, so that will not naturally limit photosynthesis. Water is not limiting in aquatic environments, but can be on land. Sunlight can be limiting seasonally in high-latitude environments. It can also be limiting in the ocean. Remember that light decreases exponentially with depth. Only the upper couple hundred meters of the ocean have sunlight. This is known as the photic zone. The exact depth of the photic zone depends on the water quality. Water with nothing growing in it can have light reach several hundred meters down, but if there's a lot of stuff in the water, then the photic zone will be much shallower. There are some other requirements as well. Photosynthesizers need an appropriate temperature or climate, which depends on their own physiology. They also need nutrients, like nitrate, phosphate, and so on. Plants will also need an atmosphere in order to exchange gases. Now we have to talk about some terms that apply to trophic interactions. Autotrophy is the ability of an organism to use carbon dioxide as its sole carbon source. It results in primary production, which is the creation of organic matter from raw materials. Autotrophy can be from photoautotrophy, which is what photosynthesizers like plants do, or chemoautotrophy. Chemoautotrophs do exactly what photosynthesizers do, but use chemical energy rather than solar energy. Just to hammer it home, photoautotrophs, like plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, use sunlight and CO2 to build their bodies and make and store food, while chemoautotrophs use chemical energy to do this. In the pyramid on the left, the primary producers are the autotrophs, since they are taking CO2 and making organic matter. Now for heterotrophy. These are organisms that cannot make their own food, like animals, and so they must eat other organisms. Heterotrophs are also called consumers because they must eat autotrophs or other heterotrophs. Recall that a trophic level denotes an organism's level within a food chain or web and describes what it is eating. Now for net primary production, also known as NPP. NPP is the total amount of organic carbon remaining with it. NPP is the total amount of organic carbon remaining with autotrophs after accounting for their own maintenance and growth, that is to say, respiration. NPP is available for trophic transfer. Gross primary production, or GPP, is the total amount of carbon fixed before plants have respired in order to meet their own maintenance and growth costs. GPP isn't relevant to entire food webs, but NPP is. Here are some more terms for you. This lecture is about the biosphere, and here is a slightly different definition of the biosphere. I know it can get a little confusing when terms have more than one meaning, but here we are. We are using the term biosphere to mean living organisms on Earth, and this is one of the 4 spheres of the Earth system. But the term biosphere is often meant as the part of the Earth inhabited by living organisms. With this definition, the biosphere includes the land, ocean, and atmosphere, which are the abiotic parts of the environment, since these organisms live in these areas. The graphic to the right has a visual for this definition of the biosphere. You should also know what an ecosystem is. An ecosystem is a community of living organisms interacting with one another and their non-living environment within a particular area. It very much includes the abiotic environment, and some of the ecological interactions that organisms have will affect and be affected by their environment. If we just want to focus on living organisms, which is how we've used the term biosphere when talking about the 4 spheres of the Earth system, using the terminology on the right, then we would have to look at a community. But organisms don't really exist in a void. They interact with their environment constantly, and so ecosystem, biome, or biosphere make more sense to study. And in terms of the 4 systems, all the 4 systems on Earth are intricately linked and interact with one another. They don't exist by themselves. These trophic levels that we've been talking about exist within an ecosystem, or community if we want to ignore the abiotic environment. Organisms have to interact with one another for trophic interactions to occur. Autotrophs are the first trophic level. This includes all primary producers. Heterotrophs include the second trophic level, which are primary consumers or herbivores, the third trophic level, which are secondary consumers or primary carnivores, and so on. Only about 10% of the energy in a trophic level is transferred to the next. Most is lost as heat, which is why the biomass of organisms in each trophic level can stack like a pyramid. The next higher trophic level needs 90% more than what they turn into biomass. We can actually measure the biosphere from space. We've done so with many satellites, and PACE is a current effort by NASA. PACE stands for Plankton, Aerosol, Cloud, Ocean, Ecosystem. It will continue and advance observations of ocean color, biogeochemistry, ecology, the carbon cycles, aerosols, and clouds. One of the easiest parts of the biosphere to observe from space is photosynthetic biomass, and biomass means the mass of living organisms. It is possible to estimate photosynthetic biomass from space because chlorophyll, which all photosynthesizers have, is a visible pigment. In the image on the right, you can see areas of the ocean where there are cyanobacteria and algae, shown in the lighter greens, and areas on land that have more vegetation, shown in dark green. Certain areas of the land and ocean have much more primary producer biomass. This is due to the Earth system affecting factors that affect the growth of primary producers, like nutrients, temperature, and rainfall. So like we said, the biosphere doesn't exist in the absence of the other spheres on Earth. There is also seasonal variation, which is not visualized by this image, as it is integrated over several years' time. Primary production varies a lot with depth in the ocean. This is because primary production, at least photosynthetic primary production, requires light, and light decreases exponentially with depth, with areas below a couple hundred meters in complete darkness. So photosynthesis won't happen in the deep ocean. The graph on the right shows a depth profile in the upper 350 or so meters of the ocean. You can see that the rate of photosynthesis is high near the surface and then tapers off and eventually goes to zero. But respiration will continue to happen as organic matter, which consists of dead organisms or waste products, rains down from above. Photosynthesis may also be seasonal at high latitudes because there will be tons of light in the summer and little to no sunlight in winter months. There are some other areas of the ocean that tend to have higher rates of photosynthesis. Primary production tends to be high close to coasts. This is because runoff from the land brings nutrients to the ocean. There are some other areas of the ocean that tend to have higher rates of photosynthesis as well. Primary production tends to be There are some other areas of the ocean that tend to have high rates of photosynthesis. Primary production tends to be high close to the coasts. This is because runoff from land brings nutrients to the ocean. Primary production is also higher in areas with upwelling. Deep water has lots of nutrients in it because of all the respiration, or remineralization, that turns organic matter back into inorganic nutrients, and this fuels primary production. And upwelling brings these nutrients to areas of high light. You see deep water upwelling to the surface at the end of the deep ocean conveyor belt. There are a lot of factors that affect primary production on land as well. Solar energy is a really important factor. It is highly seasonal at high latitudes. Temperature is another factor. Plants tend to prefer warmer temperatures, so either lower latitudes year-round or higher latitudes during the summer for growing seasons. Moisture level is also important because water is a reactant for photosynthesis, and water is necessary for all life. Rainforests occur in the tropics and at 60 degrees north and south latitude due to atmospheric convection cells, and this is where we see a lot of vegetation. Nutrient availability is also an important factor. Nutrients on land are found in the soil, and so soil quality affects the rates of photosynthesis. CO2 is important, but is usually not the limiting factor. Finally, community interactions are also a consideration. If a community has a lot of herbivores, this will cause plant biomass to decrease. There are some other areas of the ocean that tend to have high rates of photosynthesis. Primary production tends to be high close to the coasts. This is because runoff from land brings nutrients to the ocean. Primary production is also higher in areas with upwelling. Deep water has lots of nutrients in it because of all the respiration, or remineralization, that turns organic matter back into inorganic nutrients, and this fuels primary production. And upwelling brings these nutrients to areas of high light. You see deep water upwelling to the surface at the end of the deep ocean conveyor belt. You also see it along eastern boundary currents. And this is a result of something called Ekman transport, which is a function of the Coriolis effect. Finally, the equator also has a lot of upwelling due to trade winds, combining with the Coriolis effect, which sends surface water either north or south. Aquatic ecosystems also have very different trophic biomass periods than terrestrial systems. In terrestrial systems, the energy trophic pyramid typically looks similar to the biomass trophic pyramid. Remember, biomass is the actual biomass of each level, whereas the energy trophic pyramid is the amount of carbon and energy that are going through that trophic level. Aquatic ecosystems have a similar energy trophic pyramid as terrestrial systems, but the biomass trophic pyramid can be inverted. This is because primary consumers, also known as herbivores, can consume oceanic primary production extremely quickly. That means that a lot of primary production is happening, but it gets eaten so fast that we don't get a chance to measure it. The reason why aquatic primary producers can be consumed so quickly is because they are microbial and they bloom quickly when conditions are favorable. So it makes sense for a primary consumer to respond very quickly as well. There's no roughage associated with them like land plants, and so it's easier for them to be eaten. There are a lot of factors that affect primary production on land. Solar energy is a really important factor. It is highly seasonal at high latitudes. Temperature is another factor. Plants tend to prefer warmer temperatures, so either low latitudes year-round or high latitudes during summer. Moisture level is also important because water is a reactant for photosynthesis. Rainforests occur in the tropics and at 60 degrees north and south latitude due to atmospheric convection cells, and we see a lot more plant life in rainforests. Nutrient availability is also important. Nutrients are found in soil, and so soil quality affects the rates of photosynthesis. And then, of course, in the ocean, you see areas where there's higher nutrients due to upwelling or runoff. You see more photosynthesis there. CO2 is important, but is usually not the limiting factor. Finally, community interactions are also a consideration. If a community has lots of herbivores in it, this will cause plant biomass to decrease. That concludes the material. Let's go through and review the main points. Photosynthesizers use carbon dioxide, water, and solar energy to make organic matter and oxygen. Photosynthesizers fix atmospheric carbon dioxide, and energy is stored as chemical bonds in the sugars that are produced. Respiration is the opposite process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesizers are autotrophs. They can produce their own food with raw inorganic materials. Everything else is a heterotroph. Heterotrophs need an organic carbon food source, which comes directly or indirectly from plants, or some sort of autotroph. Earth's biosphere consists of ecosystems, in which there are many trophic levels, and there are many different factors that affect primary production and trophic interactions. The transmission of biomass and energy can be represented with a trophic pyramid, which shows that each trophic transfer is only about 10% efficient. Net primary production, also known as NPP, is the total amount of organic carbon fixed and remaining with autotrophs after their own respiration is subtracted. This is the organic matter available to the rest of the ecosystem and is what is visible to satellites and other methods of measuring photosynthetic biomass. Primary production in the ocean is primarily affected by light level, which is affected by depth and season, nutrients, which is affected by proximity to land and upwelling, and consumers. Primary production on land is primarily affected by light level, which is affected by season, temperature, which is affected by latitude and season, moisture, which is due to atmospheric circulation and the water cycle, nutrients in the soil, and community interactions. Thanks for sitting through the lecture. To test your learning, I suggest you review the material and make sure you can answer these questions.